All right, well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We have just had a very productive lunch, several-hour meeting. What all three of us have always agreed on, when we all work together, there's not a region in the globe that can compete with the National Capital Region. We had a great discussion. We're working together, economic development. On September 26th, the three of us will be in Toronto on a mutual trade mission to benefit all three of our jurisdictions, continuing to work together. We had a great discussion today. We dealt with the opiate crisis. We talked about the issues around the Chesapeake Bay, and we discussed the issues about WMATA. I do want to thank Secretary Ray LaHood, who we asked back in March to come together to get an up-to-down review of where we were with our system to deal with the issues of governance, and he gave a great report to us today. Obviously, we all agree there's some changes in governance that need to be made, and he had some very good and constructive, we'll let him speak, recommendations about what we need to go forward. But let me first turn it over to Governor Hogan from the great state of Maryland, who can talk about some of the issues we talked about as it relates to the opiate crisis we're facing, as well as the issues surrounding our Chesapeake Bay.
Well, thank you, Governor McAuliffe. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you for your leadership as obviously the chairman of the National Governors Association. We've had the opportunity to work together on a number of these issues, not only as a region, but at the national level. We started off the discussion today talk about Chesapeake Bay and some of the initiatives. We're all in agreement that we're going to continue to do everything we can to fight to protect federal bay funding. We talked about some of the things that we were doing. I took over just recently from Governor McAuliffe as the chairman of the Executive Council for the Bay, which includes the district and 6 other states. We're focused on that, and we talked a lot about the opioid crisis. Some of the stuff, as you know, we're the first state in the nation to declare a state of emergency. We came together as a region to sign a regional compact to try to address this issue, and we've been working very closely together, trying to share the various things that we're all doing to fight this growing crisis. And then we got a nice presentation from Secretary LaHood. I think we're all in agreement that the current governing structure of the Metro Board is somewhat dysfunctional. It's not the greatest way to run anything. I want to, compliment Paul Wiedefeld, who's doing a good job of running the thing, but he has a very difficult job when he's got 11 different, people that are providing funding, all not being able to agree on anything. So we've got some ideas. We got a lot of work ahead of us, and I just want to thank my colleagues for joining us. I think these regional get-togethers are helpful, informative, and productive.
Let me say also relates to the Bay. As you know, the president in his budget had recommending eliminating the funding, $73 million of Chesapeake Bay funding. Obviously, the three of us are in agreement that that money needs to be put back in. The House Appropriations Committee just marked up their bill. They reduced it by 13. They took it down to $60 million. The Senate has not taken action, but we are going to work very closely with our congressional delegation to make sure that funding, that is such an asset to all three of the jurisdictions. Also relates to the opioid crisis. We're also asking the president to declare it a national emergency. He talked about it as being a national emergency, but he did not declare it a national emergency. And when you actually sign the declaration, it comes with funding and resources. So we were all in agreement on that. And then we had a lengthy discussion as it relates to the issues, as the governor's mentioned on WMATA. We had a great presentation by Secretary LaHood. And I turn it now over to Mayor Bowser, if I could.
Thank you, Governor. And I want to thank both the governors for their active participation in this group. It is indeed helpful when we're talking about all of the issues that affect our growing region. And it is true that we are very competitive as a region around the whole nation and indeed the world. So when we come together, we can really we grow our strength when we can speak with one voice as the Capital Region. So I'm happy to be with you. And I want to thank Governor McAuliffe for his just tremendous leadership in Virginia and his focus on going around the world, talking about our region and bringing more visitors to our region. It helps us all. So I want to thank him for that. I introduced Paul Wiedefeld to our group to talk about what Metro has been able to accomplish under his leadership. So we've learned about some of the tough decisions that Paul has had to make since he's been the general manager at Metro. Metro. And we also learned about what it's going to take for the system to be safe and reliable and the best system in the nation. So it's important for all of us who lead the jurisdictions that Metro serves to make sure that we're focused on how it can be a safe and reliable system moving forward. We were happy to hear from Secretary LaHood as he has looked at other systems around the nation to see how Metro stands up in terms of its expenses and how other jurisdictions fund the capital needs that they have. And so we're called on together to come up with some solutions, and I would look forward to working with our partners in Maryland and Virginia to do exactly that.
Thank you. Let me call Secretary LaHood up to the microphone now. As you know, back in March, Virginia actually went out and hired Secretary LaHood. In consultation, I talked to both Mayor Bowser and Governor Hogan. I said we'd foot the bill. If you want to contribute, I'll be happy. So I just continue to make that offer today. But it was important for us to do it in Virginia because there had been a lot of misperceptions, a lot of myths out there. It had gotten to a place where I was concerned that my General Assembly, I could not get them to a place where adequately get the funding that was necessary to go forward because there was a lot of misperceptions out there as it related to our metro. So I wanted to go out. We got the expert, Aubrey Lane and I got together, and we picked who we think is the best on transportation in the country. Republican congressman from the great state of Illinois, but a great Secretary of Transportation. And we asked him to come in and do a top-to-bottom review to deal with a lot of these different issues. I met with the Secretary when we first hired him. I said, I will not talk to you again until the report is done. You go out and do what you need to do. And he gave us that report today. So I'll let Secretary LaHood speak for himself.
Thank you, Governor. We looked at 4 major areas in our study that we have completed. And our goal today was to make our recommendations and to give these folks, obviously, an opportunity to think about them. And we're going to write the report through the month of September and present it as a written report in early October. The one thing that we heard consistently throughout our interviews and meetings is that Paul Wiedefeld is doing an outstanding job as the CEO of WMATA. We've never heard one word of criticism from Paul, about Paul, from any of the people. And we talked to everyone. We talked to people in Maryland, Virginia, Northern Virginia, Southern Virginia. We talked to legislators. We talked to other mayors and people that serve on city councils. So we think we really have the pulse of really the recommendations that we're making are from the work that we've done over the last several months. In terms of governance, we think that and frankly are recommending for these folks to think about establishing a temporary board of governance for WMATA that is smaller than the current board that can address the issues of funding in terms of how much people contribute, how that formula is developed, what the federal government should be including in that. And we looked at and have recommended along the lines of the issue of long-term maintenance funding to take care of buying new cars and fixing up tracks and fixing escalators and all of the things that go along with maintaining a long-term kind of a management system on maintenance. And fourthly, we looked at and are recommending some things along the lines of legacy costs. We know that legacy costs are costs that can, over time, use up a lot of resources. And so we have given all this information in terms of a report today, and we've asked the 2 governors and the mayor to think about this. I've also briefed the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, on the meeting and what we're talking about here. And so we'll get feedback from them, and we'll put our final report together and issue it in early October.
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate
Thank you.
We're going to take a couple questions.
Yeah, I have actually a question for Secretary LaHood, if you don't mind, sir. What is today your recommendation on funding? Or are you not at the point yet where you would recommend a sales tax, a gas tax, leave it up to each of the 3 jurisdictions to decide that on their own? What's your stance today?
Yeah, I'm not, you know, I didn't get into, what, you know, how people should raise the money. What we really looked at is what it would take over the next several years to get WMATA back into a position where it has the kind of equipment and it has the kind of rails and it has the kind of facilities to make it back to being the number one transit system in America, which it's not today. So I didn't have any, you know, I'm going to leave it up to these folks who are elected to make decisions like that.
So do you agree then with Metro's computations that it needs an additional $500 million per year over the next 10 years?
Metro needs an additional money to get it back into the position where it has state-of-the-art equipment. I didn't come up with a figure. Everybody knows what the figures are. Everybody knows what Paul is recommending, and we'll include some of that in our final report.
Mayor Bowser, do you agree that we've heard the two governors say that they both agree that there should be a change in the governance structure of Metro? I haven't actually heard you say that.
We would certainly be open to looking at the governance structure for Metro, but we believe that the two go hand in hand. Just changing the governance without a focus on how the system is safe and reliable over the next 10 years is a start, but it's not enough.
Mayor Bowser, you've been a big proponent of the sales tax method here. How do you think your two colleagues reacted to that today?
We didn't talk about that today.
So,
Governor Hogan, I mean, is there a Maryland position in response to all of this, or kind of what do you see as the next steps here?
Well, I think we're all in agreement that we need to finalize Secretary LaHood's report and take a look at it and look at Paul Wiedefeld's numbers on where the shortfall is, and then find a way to come up with some solutions. But yeah, we actually haven't seen the written report, and the first time I've heard anything about it was today. So certainly got some information, and we're looking forward to moving forward. We also had our announcement today on the Purple Line, which is going to have 21 stops, and when it's completed, will dramatically increase ridership from Maryland on the Metro. But you know, that's what we were really focused on today, and then just listening.
So then, Governor McAuliffe, is this something that is possible to do if you all haven't agreed on anything? And obviously you won't be there for the next General Assembly session, but is this something that is possible to address in the next General Assembly session?
Oh, yeah. I think I need to make a recommendation. I mean, we have to have this put together before the General Assembly comes in. I've been very clear for several years. I had been very critical, obviously, the governance for a long time. I thought it took entirely too long to get a new general manager in there. I was very vocal on that topic. I think the board is dysfunctional. I've said that for a long time. I think we're all in agreement. We're going to come up with some new type of governance structure. I've always said governance structure, and I agree with the mayor, goes hand in hand with making sure that we have dedicated streams of funding. The way I look at Metro, we all three of us go around the globe promoting our region. We call this the greatest region in the globe, and we truly believe it. Part of that is our great Metro system. We need to get back, as Secretary LaHood, to the greatest system in the country. We're not there. We're far from it today, but we now have a vision. I do want to thank Paul as well, but we now have a plan. We have a vision, and I'm going to go back and work with the members of the General Assembly. It's a little trickier in Virginia because, as you know, we have I only appoint one member, but you know, I spent an hour yesterday on the phone with Sharon Bova. I understand where we need to go in Virginia, but it was great having this. That's why Secretary LaHood's report was so important. You know, there have been myths about labor costs. Well, our report today, they're all in line. In fact, it's no different than any other system. A lot of things that had been sort of thrown out into the political ether to hurt the system, many of those were debunked by the report today. So having this report is now going to allow me to go back and say, here's where we are, here's the real facts we're dealing with. We're all in agreement on governance, and this system needs to be funded. We understand that. So this, for me, in Virginia, this was a very, very important piece to have an independent outside person come in so that I can then go talk to the members of my General Assembly. We do have an election coming up in November. As you know, they'll come back in January, but we have to begin to have the whole plans in place.
I just want to add to. He talked about promoting the region, and he mentioned it briefly at the start. But we have finally. This has been something that the Washington Metropolitan Board of Trade has been asking us to do and pushing for quite some time. But we've all agreed to go to travel to Canada this month. They're our #1 trading partner, and we think this is going to be a very productive joint effort to promote the region, and it's something that we're looking forward to.
Robert McCartney from the Washington Post. Is there agreement? You've all said that you agree that there ought to be changes in the governance structure, but do the three of you all agree with Secretary LaHood's proposal to have a temporary board that would be smaller than the current board?
Well, I haven't seen any proposal. We heard talk of a proposal that's going to be written. I like the idea, but we don't know legally. I don't know legally how we accomplish it. I don't know if we have to go back and address the compact itself. Do we have to change state law regarding the appointments? But the concept of it, I think we all agree.
In substance, I agree 100%. Boards should be much smaller. I'd like to see folks not from politics on the board. I'd like to see people actually understand how to run a transit system. Listen, but no one should have any illusions here. We have big issues we're facing, and we need a small board that can work with Paul to figure out the issues and how we deal with the cost and the revenues. That's all we're looking for. It's too big, it's too unwieldy, and it's too political, would be my opinion. Let's get back to a real working board. Mayor Bowser did not answer yet.
The question, do I support a smaller board?
Replacing the current board with
I
a
would
smaller
support
board.
a smaller board. I would support a smaller board. I also think it's important, Bob, to talk about the changes that we make and how we get all of the partners playing on that board. For example, a few years ago, we added the federal government. Now, we all pay about 1/3 of the cost of the metro system. The federal government makes a much smaller contribution. So we think that we've heard this ask from the federal government. We've heard it from all of people that are active in the region. But we think it's important that as part of that discussion, we're talking about the federal government playing a larger role.
I want to ask you about that because there seems to be a missing piece of the puzzle here. You represent three very important legs of our chair when it comes to this. But the federal government, we know, and this president, has talked very big about infrastructure and rebuilding rail systems and making things great.
Right.
Do you all feel that this administration is going to put its money where its mouth is about things like infrastructure, specifically Metro, in the nation's capital?
Well, thank you for the question, because this is something that I've personally been focused on from day one, and that is more federal funding and more attention from the federal government to solving this issue. Federal government, when the administration first came in, there was talk and a proposal, I guess, by the budget office to say that they were going to eliminate the $150 million a year in funding. I went and met with Secretary Chow and said not only should they not eliminate the $150 million, but in my opinion, since 40 to 45% of the riders are federal employees and it's the federal city, that they ought to be, Maryland pays $500 million a year, and the federal government was putting up 150 that they were talking about cutting. And I've been fighting against that as much as I can with anyone who will listen in the White House and in the Office of Transportation. And frankly, I think we need more federal funding. And that's been my focus.
So what I'd like to
Let me answer this if I could. First of all, I've spoken to the president directly on this topic. Now, they're proposing, was it $90 billion of cutting to the Federal Highway Trust Fund? Cuts, $90 billion. That will not alleviate our problems here in Metro. It will not alleviate the thousands of bridges and roads today in America that we need infrastructure spending in this country. I've told the president directly. I've told his advisors. In fact, my Secretary of Education will be meeting with him tomorrow. P3s are not the answer. We in Virginia lead the nation on P3s, but a lot of people don't have tolling revenue. So we need dedicated funding, and the president and his team need to come up with a plan to come up with a dedicated source of funding for infrastructure. And this, of course, and I think, Mayor, was it 45% of the federal workers use the Metro?
Absolutely.
I mean,
from all over the region. Let me just jump in here to say this. We all talk to the federal government about Metro. I think that if any of us had a meeting with a federal official and Metro wasn't at the top of the list, it would just be negligence on our part. I had a meeting in the Oval Office, Paul and I, with President Trump, where Metro was a top issue to make sure he understood his responsibility in this region is different than other regions because of the federal presence. And so we made that point directly to him. We made it loud and clear. The first cabinet secretary I met with was Elaine Chao to talk about the same thing. I think Secretary Chao gets it, but she has to have that very clear commitment from the White House to move it forward. We should also talk about the congressional delegation. We thank Congresswoman Norton for her part, but we don't have 2 senators to make that argument. So we rely on the delegations in Maryland and Virginia to make that argument as well. But we should not push off our own responsibility to move people around our region, because if we're going to go to China and Canada and all the places we go to sell our region, we also have to make sure that we are leading to bring our system back, and that's important. The number that we've heard is it's going to take $500 million over the next 10 years to be in a state of good repair. That doesn't even account for the growth of this region. And we, for one, are growing about 1,000 people a month. We cannot have each of those people bring a car. It will be total gridlock in Washington, D.C., and I dare say on the roads of Maryland and Virginia. So that's our focus. We have to hit it all kinds of ways. We have to hit it with the feds, but we also have to be very responsible in our own jurisdictions about how we're going to get to that number.
First of all, hold on a second. I just want to say that we talk about federal funding, and I just mention again that we were able to secure $900 million in federal funding just today on the largest P3 partnership on transportation in the nation. And it's going to have 21 new stops that will tie into Amtrak, MARC Train, and Metro. And it's a huge shot in the arm for this system.
So
it's fantastic.
One at a time. Agnostic on how you come up with the money, and he promised, and it was
who'd you say was?
Secretary LaHood.
Yeah.
The gentleman right now.
Yeah.
Said that he seems agnostic on how you come up with the money. He promised at the start of this that he didn't need to come up with some mountainous study, reams of paper, because we all know back in 2005, Parsons Brinckerhoff did a study similar to this one that said Metro was, quote, literally falling apart and dedicated funding was the answer. So can you answer today, where are you specifically on dedicated funding? Do you agree it's necessary? And how do each of you think it should be arrived at? Because at the end of the day, that's all that really matters.
First of all, I've been very clear. I support dedicated funding. I said we got to deal with the governance issues, and we are now dealing with those governance issues. So I'm in a very comfortable place, and we'll get to a place that I believe will have a working board that does their job. That's the most important thing for me to be able to. Remember, Virginia is a Dillon rule state. Localities are not allowed to raise taxes themselves. It has to come through our General Assembly. We're different than a lot of other states. So I have to have a comprehensive plan to deal with all the issues, and I had to debunk a lot of things that were false out there. If I tried to go earlier this year to my General Assembly, no chance. That was clear. Anybody who understands Virginia politics. That's why it was important to bring Secretary LaHood in, show some leadership, and take it to that next level. I understand what we have to do. I'm going to deal with our legislature. I'm going to talk to our respective jurisdictions to do it. But the mayor raised a very important point. I mean, a report came out the other day that Virginia will now hit 10 million people over the next 20 years. 10th largest state in America. Existing Metro users should understand that if we didn't have the Metro, think of what would happen. You shut the Metro down for a day, that's a lot more. This affects not only the riders, but the non-riders. We have to get serious. We have a dynamic, growing region. Our system has to be dynamic growing, and I will work with my legislature before they come into session. We're already having meetings to come up with a plan. I'm not going to answer your question today. I would be foolish to do that. I'm going to take the data I have. I'm going to have to do. I have a very Republican legislature, but I've had great success with them on economic development, transportation, education, and we work in a bipartisan way.
Mark, so your last question, Mark.
Governor Hogan, earlier today, the University of Maryland announced that the University of Maryland Marching Band will stop playing the state song, Maryland, My Maryland, at sporting events. Your comment on that?
That's the first I've heard of it, and I'll have to get some more detail before I respond to it.
Against that, you had called it political correctness run amok.
Actually, I was never referring to the song that way, but there is a paragraph, there is a one verse in that song which is pretty egregious, but it's never been sung before, and I'd never heard it before. It came up in the legislature last year. The legislature chose not to do anything about it, but I'm sure they'll be discussing it again this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.